you're joining us more from the NWCG smoke side. RAP had a really robust conversation on smoke and wildfires at their spring business meeting in Portland, the RAP Westar group. And so that included presentations from the regional forester in that part of the country, Pete Caligari from the Nature Conservancy, and folks from state wildfire agencies, both I think CAL FIRE and one of the other DNRs. And so that led to, of course, as always does, a robust discussion. And so my question was, Rhonda, do you know if that was recorded and if we'll be posting the links to that discussion in case anybody wants to look at any of those topics?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll post the links in the chat in just a sec. I'll go grab them. They are on our website already. And there's our agenda linked with the presentations that you can look at the presentations and also the recording. So I'll make sure that I send that out. And you're right, it was a great conversation. I think it's one of those topics where we could spend so much longer than just even the 2 hours we had for that panel discussion. We didn't even get to some of the questions that Rick had outlined to go over that, it was great. So yeah, I'll put that in the chat.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Sorry, forgot to mention the MC of the whole event, and that was Rick Graw. So thanks to Rick for kind of programming that time. Cool. That's all I had for an intro topic set.
Thanks, Paul. And representative from the NIC today, I did hear someone at the beginning of the call said they're kind of deciding who it would be.
Yeah, that's going to be me, Seth.
Thanks,
Nick's
James.
picking up one of our colleagues at the airport right now, so he's not going to make it back in time. All right.
Well, appreciate you briefing us. Yeah, just introduce yourself and get rolling.
Sure. I'm Jim Wallman. I'm one of the meteorologists here at the NIC in predictive services, and I've been here about 2 years, and I'll be talking about the season outlook. It's just going to be really focused more June through August right now. We are going to have the next outlook out in a week, so and with some updated information, but I'll go through a little bit about the uncertainties of it here in a second. So let me just share my screen. So, all right, so you should see a screen. It's going to go through a little bit of our overview for some of you that are not familiar with predictive services, and then really get into the outlook for this summer. Really, this is our program was established back in 2001, and it's our staff consists of intel coordinators, meteorologists, and fire analysts. Not only do we have the national unit here at NWCG, but each GAC has its own predictive service unit, and those forecasts are issued independently, but collaboration and coordination occurs extensively. We do have a call this afternoon, for example, for our next monthly outlook. And our information, that GAC information, integrated into our national outlook. So what Nick and I do, I think with the way we look at it here, is we're more kind of, collaboration masters kind of a thing, making sure everybody's talking and put it together. A lot of the hard work and everyone is done by our colleagues in each of the GACs, and so we wouldn't be able to do what we do without their support. So it's really something that we are grateful for all those people, our colleagues in the GACs. So our mission is really decision support. Our goal is actionable intelligence, and we're looking more large scale, long term. Primary focus is going to be on fire activity, resource tracking, fire weather and climate, and the fuels and fire danger and what's going on. Other roles that we do, a lot of our colleagues in the GACs help with planning, with your fire danger operations plans, annual operations plans, training, research and development, and several of us are on NWCG committees and teams as well. So I'm going to start getting into the outlook here after that brief overview. And snowpack, I think if you remember this winter, all the atmospheric rivers moving to California, into the Great Basin. Snowpack continues to be well above normal, even in a late May across much of California, the Great Basin. But as we go farther north, the extreme temperatures and record-setting temperatures we saw over the Northwest and parts of the Northern Rockies and Canada the last couple of weeks, the snowpack there, after being near normal on April 1st, has rapidly diminished over the last 2 weeks. And in a lot of cases, it's off early, about 2 weeks early. In contrast, in Alaska, after a very wet and cold April, their snowpack in some places is still there, but it's starting to come off now. And the fields are exposed, with some fires being reported routinely now, at least small fires in the lower elevations there in Alaska as well. And this is what it looks like, the snow depth as of yesterday. You can still see that the snowpack in the Sierra really stands out, but there's still some snow, of course, in the Cascades and in the Central Rockies, where it still is a bit above normal there. But even though you've seen the snow in the Northern Rockies, it's rapidly diminished. And if you look at northern Idaho, northwest Montana, almost all of it is off there, and that's a concern for us, and that's something that we've seen. It's probably going to be addressed in the next outlook. Current drought monitor really is reflecting the wet winter we had. Much improved drought across California, the Great Basin, and much of the Rockies. However, drought has developed across portions of northern Idaho and northwest Montana over the winter, and there is also drought development in portions of mid-Atlantic and Florida. And then extensive drought continues over the central and southern plains. However, the good news there is they have been receiving quite a bit of precipitation the last week or two, and so there'll probably be some significant changes coming this week and the next couple of weeks, with some improvement over those areas. So overall, the drought is looking good in portions of the West, although there is some concern in the Northern Rockies right now. At least for the last 10 days of this month, above normal temperatures look to continue in the Northwest and the Northern Plains and Great Lakes. And precipitation has been generally above normal in the West over the last week or so, especially in the Southwest and Southern Rockies, Southern Great Basin, where this is typically they're getting into their driest time of year. And they've actually been seeing daily showers and thunderstorms, although those look to diminish. But overall, the pattern looks to be focused a little bit more north in the Great Basin into the Rockies. Now, it's showing above normal, but this is not something like really a washout or anything like that, like it would be in sometimes in the winter with the bigger storms and the atmospheric rivers. It's just kind of looking at daily isolated scattered showers and thunderstorms. So nothing earth-shattering, but it will be above normal there. And those below normal temperatures above normal temperatures in the Great Lakes and Northeast, and then below normal precipitation for the rest of the month is a bit of a concern going forward, because they have been dry for the last 2 to 3 weeks as well. Going into June to August, much of the country looks to be above normal, especially the Southwest, Gulf Coast, East Coast, extending to the Northwest. Alaska is likely to be above normal temperatures as well. And precipitation, overall good news is that the eastern part of the U.S. looks to be above normal, but the monsoon, as we head into a potential El Nino, may be below normal. And that is a concern, and also the below normal precipitation up in the Pacific Northwest. As far as Alaska, really no strong chances of above or below normal, although it might be a little bit drier than normal along the coast there in southern Alaska, but we're not seeing anything there that's really significant, really concerns us at this time. So as I mentioned, we're likely heading to El Nino. So just to remind everyone, we had a 3-year cycle of La Nina, which is really unusual. It's only happened, I think, 3 times before. And very strong and active winter led and spring Madden-Julian oscillation, which is a bunch of convection in the tropics that links to the mid-latitudes. And that also helped to bring well above normal precipitation in the West into early April. And then we currently are in an El Nino watch, and we're likely to have a rapid transition to El Nino this summer. Really, it looks to occur in the next month now, with a 90% chance of El Nino continuing through the end of the year. And this will have large-scale implications on weather and climate. And some of the specifics are unclear, because once it does switch, there's normally a bit of a lag in the atmosphere. So that's kind of what our uncertainty is, at least for the summer. As we get into fall and winter, we probably feel a little bit more confident. But for this summer, Just a little, it's kind of leaving a little lower confidence right now until we see how that develops over the next month. So getting the outlook, at least for the rest of this month, overall, this is looked really good. Below normal potential, Southwest, Southern California coast and Southern Great Basin. The above normal potential we put there for the far west Texas really hasn't materialized. And a lot of that has been due to the moisture that they've been receiving over the last 2 weeks. It's been, scattered showers and thunderstorms almost daily the last 2 weeks, and humidity's been above normal too. So that's overall looking pretty good right now. But as we head into next month, it's still across much of the southwest parts of the Great Basin and much of the California mountains looks to be below normal, mainly due to that above normal snowpack, the extremely wet winter we had. Things are running a bit delayed for the fire season there. Now, I did mention the Great Lakes before and portions of the Western Great Lakes, Minnesota. That's where this trend of drier than normal conditions that we've had over the last couple of weeks looks to continue at least into mid-June. So we're expecting above normal potential there. We also have some concerns into the Northeast, although they're not traditionally one of those areas that get a whole lot of fire. It is something that we are watching because if they continue to be dry, they could have a little bit longer than normal spring fire season there. As far as Alaska, we're expecting a normal fire season up there, starting in June. A pretty good ramp up probably in June as is typical, then continuing to July. As we go into July, below normal potential really looks to be more in the Sierra and Northwest California mountains due to that snowpack, the delayed conditions, everything running well behind due to the later than normal snow melt. But in the Basin and Range, in portions of the Columbia Basin, Southeast Oregon and Northwestern Great Basin, above normal potential, mainly due to the grass loading we had from last year's wet spring. And then also the wet winter will have some renewed grass growth. And I mean, I've already seeing it quite a bit out my window, maybe not to the extent as last year, but combined with last year is a concern. And so that's why we have that above normal. But the rest of the country right now, we're looking for near normal potential. That continues in August, much of the country near normal. And then that above normal potential continuing in portions of the Northwest, Northern Great Basin. Southern Sierra, I mean, they still have 10 to 15 feet of snow on the ground in places still that'll come off. And so that looks to be below normal, especially the higher elevations, which will take a long time to melt off because of the excessive snowpack there. Now, one thing I'm going to mention here is the two concerns. And I showed the above normal or the below normal snowpack in the Northern Rockies and the rapid melt we've had because of the above normal temperatures that's exposing fuels earlier than normal. And so if we continue to be warm and dry through June, which is typically a wet month for the Northern Rockies, then we could have an above normal fire season up there, especially as we head to late July and August. So that's something we're going to be talking about later today and for the rest of this month before our new outlook. And then the Southwest as well. Typically, they see a downturn in fire activity July and August as the monsoon hits. But this year, it's looking like below normal because typically an El Nino leads to a below normal monsoon. So that's the other area we have uncertainty. I wouldn't say it's going to be like 2020, that kind of a fire season where extended all summer, but it could be a bit of above normal, which means we could have a couple fires maybe here and there, but we're going to try and dial that down over the next week. So just to summarize, record snowfall and snowpack in Sierra, Utah, Southern Great Basin will delay fire season in these areas with below normal potential. Much of the Southwest will likely have below normal potential through June as well. Western Great Lakes will have that window for above normal potential, beginning here probably in about a week or so, especially if this drier pattern persists for the next month. And then concern for the above normal rangeland fire potential in the inland Northwest and portions of the Northwest Great Basin, mainly due to the fuel loading and the climate forecast that we have. And then, like I mentioned, the two areas of uncertainty where we could see above normal, and we're going to try and see if that is going to happen, is Northern Rockies and possibly the Southwest. End of report.
Yeah, thanks, Thanks so much, Jim. I would open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions for Jim?
Jim, just wanted to ask, you mentioned your next Outlook. Do you guys post those at the beginning of the month, or what's the schedule for those?
Those are posted on the first of the month by noon on the first of the month.
Okay.
So on June 1st, if you go to our webpage, you'll see them there posted.
Great. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Looks like one hand up. Yeah. Sarah?
Hey,
Wanna
yeah,
come off mute?
you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Do you guys predict the like how the strength of the monsoon coming up to see like how much lightning we're gonna get?
That's a very difficult question. That's something we try to anticipate, but it's typically difficult. Even though like in a good monsoon year like last year or 2021, we tend to see a bit more lightning associated with the monsoon. The monsoon also tends to have quite a bit of higher humidity, rainfall with it. And so that actually can, while you could get a bunch of starts, it then generally isn't quite as concerning. What we worry more about, and this is where it gets really tricky for us to predict lightning in the summer, is on the periphery of the monsoon. Are there any systems that come off the Pacific and interact with the monsoon where we don't get a whole lot of moisture from the monsoon, but we get enough to trigger thunderstorms? Kind of thinking like 2021 in California type of event, or 2020 California, or in the Northern Rockies, 2020 June of 20 July of 2021. Those are the ones that are concerning. That's something that's really difficult to predict on a seasonal basis, unfortunately.
Hey, thanks.
I've got one, Jim.
Sure.
I know it's not your mandate to track fuel conditions and fire potential in British Columbia and Alberta, but it certainly looks like they're having a busy season. It's not unusual for them to be busy, I think, at this time of year, because if I remember right, the Fort McMurray fire from some years back was also about this time of year. Do you that we saw in the last week, an enormous amount of air quality impacts along the northern states and even pretty deep into the middle belt of the lower 48. So do you have any sense of how things are shaping up there seasonality wise?
Yeah, we actually work closely. We do the North American Outlook too with our colleagues from Canada, and how quickly this season came on up there and how quickly it dried out was really surprised. They were surprised at first at how intense it was, because they had the heat wave right when the snow came off, the fuels were available, and and then they're dealing with all these fires. So while where those fires are occurring in the boreal forest, northern Alberta, Saskatchewan, northern British Columbia, Northwest Territories, this is typically their busiest time, is mid-May through mid-June, and then they start to get wetter. But the extent of this season and the number of fires and just how severe it is unusual. Like you mentioned, the last time, you had Fort McMurray in 2016 that you mentioned was a really big fire. That was another big fire year. But as far as what's going on, they do expect their above normal fire activity actually to continue through most of the summer, at least through July, from what we've seen from the links they provided us. Our colleague Richard Carr up there has been really helpful in telling us what's going on and filling us in. And then the attention will turn more towards British Columbia, because their typical fire season, mid-June into mid-August. Also looking to have a above normal season there as well. That's what we've got. So that's, if you can find it on, on theirs, also on the North American Outlook too as well.
Thanks. Guess we'll be keeping an eye on for those northerly winds to push more smoke down south potentially.
Well, the good news is they're getting rain on a lot of those fires. They've had about 1 inch to 2 inches of rain in the last 36 hours, so that'll help.
Awesome. Jim, thanks for the information. Really appreciate it. Any other questions
thank you.
from the group? All right, well, we'll roll into EPA regulatory update. Rick, are you on?
Yeah, hey Seth, I'm on. Yep.
Great.
Hey everyone. Yeah, and I don't have a whole lot to cover today. I'll just kind of hit on a few things and take questions if people have them. But the only real regulatory activity that I'm going to give an update on today is EPA's proposal to revise the particulate matter National Ambient Air Quality Standards. That proposal was put out in January of this year. Many of you probably are aware of that, and probably some of you even provided comments, which is a good thing. The agency, the comment period ended at the end of March. The agency did receive, I don't know the total number of comments, but I know it was in the hundreds of thousands. And so our folks at our headquarters office in charge of that rulemaking are in the process of going through cataloging and starting to prepare responses to comments and considering the comments in development of the final rulemaking, which is scheduled to still be issued by the end of this year. To my understanding, it could carry over into early next year, possibly. Folks know that EPA doesn't always meet its goals on finalizing rulemakings, but the basic proposal was to lower the annual PM NAC standard from the current value of 12 microgram per cubic meter down to somewhere in the range of 9 to 10 microgram per cubic meter. Like I said, we had many comments on all aspects of the proposed rule. Some supporting, as you would imagine, the low end, some supporting higher end. And so the agency is considering all of that and will be making a decision. The only real status I can provide at this time is that options are being considered and they will be briefed up through the agency this summer. So I guess I'll stop there, see if anybody has any questions on the PM NACS proposal that I may or may not be able to answer.
Rick, I'll hit you with one just in terms of how the response to those comments are posted and that kind of process. How does
Okay.
EPA handle that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Seth. Usually, like I said, the comments are kind of cataloged together by topic. Like there won't be individual responses to all of those hundreds of thousands of comments, obviously, but any overlapping topics, there are responses provided in what's called the preamble of the final rule, which is a narrative section of the rulemaking before the actual regulatory language. And that section provides it'll have like a summary of, we got this comment about this topic of, say, we think the NAC should be lowered to 9 microgram per cubic meter, and then there'll be a response summary of what the agency believes in terms of how those comments relate to the final decision. So I hope that helps. And then for some rulemakings, there's a supplementary response to comments document that goes into a lot more detail, and I don't know for sure whether that a document like that will be prepared separately for this rulemaking.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. Yeah, and then I don't have a lot of detail on the there is a concurrent also reconsideration of the ozone National Ambient Air Quality Standard, and that process is lagging behind. The proposal has not been released at this point. There are scientific evaluations going on and reevaluation of the data, the health-based data and studies that are supporting the level of the NACs. And I don't have a definite schedule at this point, but the plan was to release a proposal sometime this year and finalize it in 2024. So that's kind of the primary regulatory updates I had. I did have a couple of other things I wanted to mention, some key activities that took place since our last call. We had what we call Southeast Prescribed Fire and Air Quality Smoke Summit here in the Southeast that a number of our states attended. That was in March, and the primary focus of that summit was to discuss these new proposed PM NACs revisions and how that might relate to the use of prescribed fire, continued use of prescribed fire in the Southeast. We had a lot of good discussions, talked about the EPA's exceptional events rule, which is one mechanism that could be used under the existing regulatory framework to exempt impacts of prescribed fire or wildfires, for that matter, from the calculation of the how to determine whether an area is meeting or not meeting the NACs from the ambient monitoring data. So there was a lot of discussion about that rule. That rule, like I said, is an existing rule, and there's some EPA guidance that was issued in 2019 that talks about how that rule could be applied for prescribed fire. We have not needed to do that, and there's only really a couple examples nationwide where that's been done. But if the NACs levels do get lower, then it's likely that there will be a lot more requests related to prescribed fire anyway, to use the exceptional events rule. So a lot more detail I could go into on that, but I don't think we have time, and I'd be happy to talk about that maybe on a future call. Any questions about that issue? Okay.
Rick,
Go ahead.
I guess I just say I'm glad to hear that's on the radar, and you mentioned the summit there. Yeah, I don't think it would be limited in scope to any one region of the country, to be honest. We're gonna
Definitely not. Yeah, and that's a good point. We've had some internal discussions with EPA with different regions. It's definitely important with all the wildfire issues in the West. There's, as you all know, a lot of effort to try and use prescribed fire to help reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfires, and grant money through the Forest Service and all to increase the use of prescribed fire in the West. And so the Western regions of EPA have been involved in these discussions as well. And so we're having more activity than I've seen in my 15-ish years working on fire issues in the agency, more discussions, more activity about this issue than any time during that last 15-year period. So I think that's really good for all regions of the country. And along those lines, there was also, I wanted to mention, there was the Northwest does a smoke management summit regularly as well, and they were able to do one again this year following the delays from the pandemic. And they had it was a hybrid summit, had many attendees. Maybe some of you on this call attended it. They talked about numerous issues about smoke and health impacts, and even like the mental health impacts of dealing with smoke from wildfires and all of those kinds of things. So very good meeting. And I was going to mention, I have links to the presentations from both that Northwest meeting and our Southeast Prescribed Fire Summit. Neither one was recorded, but we do have the presentations available on Google Drive links, and I'll put those in the chat for folks if they want to check out the presentation materials.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. There's
No, go
There's a
ahead.
question along a similar topic in the chat, so I can read it if you're not seeing it, right?
Okay, yeah, I didn't have the chat pulled up, but go ahead.
This is from Melissa Maestas, I believe with South Coast AQMD. Have there been any EPA concurred prescribed fire exceptional events demonstrations?
That's a good question. None in my region, in the Southeast where I am. And I don't have well, I don't have a definite answer for you. I've heard that there potentially was one in the Midwest area related to some fires in the like the Flint Hills region, but I've never seen that. So I could follow up and try and get you a definite answer, but that's the only one that I've definitely heard of. If there is there any? Oh, I see Pete's chiming in. Pete, you want to share what you know?
My understanding was it was it's pre the current iteration of the rule, but if there is that one, that would have been posted online. I mean, because EPA does post some of the different approaches, some of the demonstrations are online as part of the resource on the exceptional events page, which I believe, is helpful to all the states challenged with this task.
And Pete, was that one for ozone, if I remember right?
I don't remember at this point. They've had
Okay.
PM and they've had PM 2.5 and they've had ozone, and yeah, that's all I remember. So maybe someone's going to the ER page and can report out. I'm chatting, so I'm not writing. I'm not tapping. Okay, Carol, I thought I saw you on. Was that 26? Was that pre-rule change? We're all trying
Carol,
to figure
can
this
you
out.
come off mute maybe and give us a description of that?
Yeah. Okay. So she's thinking the same thing I remember.
Yes, Kansas has done at least one, maybe more. The first one was like 120 pages, and it took them several months to prepare. It was quite intensive, and I think since then they have relaxed the rules. Kansas has exceedances related to prescribed fire most years, but fortunately they don't always result in having to write an exceptional event.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that's a good point. just so y'all know, kind of the agency's mode of operation related to the exceptional events rule is that even if an event like a prescribed fire has been found to cause an exceedance of the NACs, there's a couple levels there. One, does that exceedance lead to an actual violation, which for PM, it's the 3-year average of those values. So even if it caused a violation, the next level is there a regulatory decision that's being impacted by that? And what I mean by regulatory decision, if an area has already been designated as in attainment with the NACs, just because there's a violation doesn't, there's different ways that that would could be dealt with from a compliance perspective. So it may not necessarily trigger a regulatory decision. What will trigger a regulatory decision upcoming if the agency decides to revise the PM NACs, then the entire country is reevaluated for attainment with any new NACs. And so that is a regulatory process, and that's what would trigger potential application of the exceptional events rule and concurrence. So I hope that's somewhat clear. Okay, any other questions about that issue? I see someone posted a link to the Region 7 concurrence letter. Thank you, Randall. Okay, and then the last thing I was going to mention, and Pete, you're welcome to chime in here too as well. Follow-up discussions out of our smoke summit here in the Southeast. Pete attended that summit. That was great to have you there, Pete. And we've had an initial call, and we're having another call with some of our state agencies here in the Southeast about how to take what data is being collected in prescribed fire permitting and compile that data into some type of consolidated database and potentially even get it into EPA's and Forest Service and CDC's fire and smoke map on the Air Now page. And so we had a good initial discussion. There is some data out there, and we just need to figure out how to try and get that all compiled. I see, Pete, you've come on screen. Add whatever you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, while we were together, we talked about the value of the National Emission Inventory and prescribed fire versus wildfire information, the importance of, how we display prescribed fire activity as we ramp it up and there's more publicity about that activity, the tightening of the standards at the same time. People are wondering what the impacts are. So, we learned of a number of states that have some systems, some that are behind firewalls, others that are out publicly available, some at air quality, some with forestry. And so we just decided to try and explore that. NRCS has been contracted to pull fire data. I'm going to use that as a generalized term, in a more of a historical sense. And then Region 8 Forest Service also tracks a lot of this as well. And so this piece is, what might be possible to some of this information go into blue sky, to some of this information go to a dashboard that helps people prevent and manage interstate transport of burn smoke, and make good decisions, because there is the interstate transport issue that we deal with in the Southeast, and we've watched that. Rick and Tammy is on, and a few others, and some of the folks from Georgia. So just kind of an exploration on what's possible. you know, and so anyway, since we are assimilating a heck of a lot of wildfire data out of InsaWeb into the fire and smoke map, as well as some of the InsaWeb prescribed fire information, which is just a thimbleful and very federal centric at best, you know, what might be possible? We have a lot of assigned fire detects all over the country. So inquiring minds in the public would like to know what that is. And if we're not having big smoke impacts, I think it actually reflects very, very well on the vision of more prescribed fire. If people understand that you can conduct prescribed fire without having adverse impacts, and some of the imagery in the Southeast really does show that, shows how fleeting it can be, and so on. So we just kind of started there. I think there's opportunities to expand this dialogue to other states that have smoke management programs and tracking systems. But you know, how do we integrate that? And I was literally on the phone with Frankie Romero within the Forest Service and the program that I'm in. And there's some, you know, needs within just the Forest Service in general on this topic. So yeah, it's an exploration. We'll keep you posted on where that goes. Got to start somewhere, and it made sense since we started the dialogue in the Southeast to see what's possible. And as we discussed in the West Star meeting in San Diego with fire folks, there's, you know, offer from Air Fire Team, which is part of this discussion from Forest Service research, you know, on integrating whatever information is in the West as well. So we haven't had any direct dialogue outside of a couple of very specific locations that were already on their way. But you know, what's possible. I will say one thing though, that came out of the meeting that we did have a couple of weeks ago, and that was that a lot of the southeastern states are using TechnoSilva as a contractor for assembling some of this information and display, which was news to me. I didn't know that they were assimilating that information in a system, and I'm not sure that everyone really knows that group. They do a lot of wildfire prediction work and fire behavior work all around the world, and didn't realize they were in this line as well. And maybe something that we might consider on this call, interacting with you know, some of the contractors that could support improving how we track some of the fire pieces out there on the landscape. So they're in the biz. So that was kind of new.
All right, thanks, Pete. Yeah, that's all I had, Seth.
Thanks, Pete and Rick. Any questions on the regulatory side of the house, exceptional events or otherwise? Okay, Rick, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yep.
So we'll keep moving, and now we'll start talking about CWPPs and CWDGs, and this may be new concept programs for you guys, and others may be familiar with it, but we will start off kind of with a brief CWPP, CWDG 101, just to give you some information, and then we'll kind of tie it into the smoke ready piece. So Jen Croft with the Forest Service and Julie Murphy, who is actually recently with the Forest Service, are going to give us some information on these topics. Julie was previously with the state of Utah, I believe. So the goal here is to kind of give you a federal Forest Service perspective, and then Julie will follow and get us kind of some state implementation perspective following that. Jen, appreciate the help. I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
You bet. Thanks for having me. So Jen Croft with the U.S. Forest Service. I do work out of our national headquarters in fire and aviation management as a fire ecologist. And I've been Pete's deputy for a few rounds, and I still continue to go out as an air resource advisor. But I think I was recruited today in part because I was a fire management officer on a very active fire area up in the state of Washington, Okanagan, Wenatchee, and was part of the discussion to some of the first CWPPs that we charted. So just a real quick recap on the CWPPs, Community Wildfire Protection Plans themselves, emerged in 2003, kind of paired with the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. It's really when we started to recognize the inclusion and the need to coordinate across our boundary lines. And so the Community Wildfire Protection Plan kind of emerged as a means for us to do a couple things. One is to kind of evaluate the involvement in the interest of the community, bring in different perspectives and different mission operation principles that are present in, say, rural fire counties, state fire counties, and then some of our tribal cooperators as well. So the idea behind the CWPP legislation initially was to encourage communities to develop plans of action to reduce wildfire risk in collaboration with their federal partners, right? So we have a huge chunk in the landmass, private has another huge chunk in the landmass. Some way we need to get together, and CWPPs is how we did that. It also then formed the framework for how we could issue HFRAs. In 2003 with the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, one of the items that was critical was the need to designate communities at risk. So when we brought in communities at risk in the CWPP, this is pretty much what then started giving the open, I guess, declaration to some extent that your community is at high enough risk, typically has additional income and social vulnerability issues compiled with it, and or wildfire potential and frequency events for high severity events coming through that various community. So keep in mind, when you look back at where CWP came from, right, that gives, and it's been used in perpetuity going forward, then those designations of at-risk communities is what's providing every grant opportunity that goes from federal money coffers to state, rural, tribal coffers. That hinges then on that designation of community at risk and whether or not you have a CWPP in place. Okay. So things we can do under the CWPP versus the CWDG, Community Wildfire Defense Grant. So we talked about the fact that it's paired with that 2003. Most counties were given a lot of wiggle room in order to then make that designation of what WUI is. Now, the Healthy Forest Restoration Act does have a very distinct definition of WUI, but one by metric distance and the other by population densities. That is what formulated then somewhat of a buffer. Some counties just make really broad core scale decisions that the entire county, regardless of its population, was at risk because the rate and spread of fire exceeded any mathematical adjacency requirements that might be needed with that 1.5 mile component. CWPPs were designed to get all of our cooperators together kind of in the same room, including community members, EPA, rural fire districts, state fire districts, federal agencies, and then key emergency cooperators and commissioners or leadership within a given community. It is entirely dependent on those community wildfire prevention plans. They're entirely dependent upon a community's willingness to take that workload on, generally developed out of emergency operations centers. And it's required to be updated every 5 years, which has become somewhat of a financial burden to those communities that participated early on. And they either let them fall off, or then they recognize the values of investments to renew those. So on the Community Wildfire Defense Grant side, it is basically paired with and it is intended to support community wildfire protection plans themselves. We have funding mechanisms that allow us to go through those CWPP action plans, make determinations, and then use that information identified in the plan to then fund future efforts to reduce your wildfire risk. Super high focus on mitigation and prevention, not necessarily entirely focused on smoke itself, but smoke being an important byproduct that's impacting those communities at risk. Is now factored into the Community Wildfire Protection Plan system and is part of the weighting for community wildfire defense grants. So, you know, at the end of the day, that CWDG is hoping to better have the financial follow through and support needed for those CWPPs that created a great plan but didn't go anywhere because they didn't have funding associated with it to accomplish objectives. Take a breath there, see if anyone has any comments or questions related to kind of the history and the intent behind CWPPs and CWDGs. Okay, so what I want to share with you here is this is a really great, when you go, if you just Google CWDG, you'll find some information. But here's the reality is this nice little flow chart that was created for CWDG applicants. When you go to apply for, if your community is looking to invest in or seek grant funding for CWDGs, that flowchart there provides you a pretty good pathway to figure out if you're using the right approach or if it's paired to correctly. It also has some important links that are linked in there, like the CDC Social Vulnerability Index. That provides you a lot of opportunity to identify, and almost a good portion of our rural communities meet the Social Vulnerability Index components that are helpful for CWGG applications, as well as then the income requests, because a lot of the opportunities in CWDG are geared at not funding fairly well-off economically communities, but those communities that do not have the means to assist themselves. And so that's the key nuances there that you need to keep in mind as you're going through, and then recognize there's a huge importance of being identified as an at-risk community. So where does smoke fit into this big picture? I would encourage all of you, if you are not familiar with your CWPPs, reach out to your state coordinator contacts. That is on the CWDG website itself, but find your contact, reach out to them, and start having conversations. Because what we saw with this last batch of CWDG applications is there was minimal, if not no, mentions of smoke management and smoke mitigation measures needed. Yet in the CWDG itself, there are quite a few things that are eligible for funds and grants that could serve your communities a heck of a lot better. Things like those air curtain burners, filtration units that go on air conditioning systems, public buildings, school systems, purchasing large quantities of N95 respirators to support the community, trench burners, opportunities for smoke management training for all of our new community members who are now looking to take care of their own landscapes and become burners. Keep teaching them some of those principles of smoke management to prevent additional cumulative impacts to the community would be helpful. There's also a smoke-ready assistance specifically designed at helping homes become more, or rather less, open to the impacts of smoke and transporting through all those openings and cracks in all of our window sills. And they have the ability to purchase chippers and move fuels or reorganize the fuels, brush mowers, and prescribed fire training. I've included the YouTube link there because it has a pretty good note there in terms of things to think about and share with your community. Might be of value to pitch in, and if you're in a community meeting of any sort, to pitch that reality that we have opportunities to improve. And smoke seems to be one that we continually overlook. Almost all 100 and some applications that were reviewed and awarded grants, there was over 450 some applications. Not a single one of them makes mention of smoke specifically. But if you look at the components and parts and pieces, I think if we start building in this, if we masticate and wood chip, and if we rearrange the fuels, maybe that results in less smoke accumulation within a given community, even regardless of it's an unplanned or a planned ignition. So those are that's the basic foundations, essentially, things to think about as you participate. I would really, like I said, highly encourage especially EPA folks and or our air quality individuals to be part of those emergency operations center conversations. Because as that community start to revamp their CWPP, that's the time where we need to start building in some of the other opportunities, like funding for mitigation measures that impact smoke on communities, community tents, air quality tents. And keep in mind, all of those parts and pieces in the discussion are factoring in and taking into account things like your social dynamics and your demographics, whether your community is predominantly elderly and has respiratory or cardiac issues. Are they mobile? Are they immobile? Do they have an ability to get out to or get to a clean air center? All of those things can be folded into your CWPP as an action plan that you will be trying to do those things over the next 10, 15 years. And then go ahead and then push it on into the next category for then grant applications, funding, and then improvements. So with that, I see Pete did mention, yeah, there was one in Montana that did have a mention of smoke in it. But we, I think this group, the power of this group's reality here, we could be doing a whole lot more to include or at least factor in smoke into the equation with things like, at what point do we become, shutting down entire counties because of smoke issues, those kinds of things. So all the parts and pieces that go into all the effects of wildfire, both planned and unplanned, but how we can get the voice in the room. If it shows up in a CWPP, we can get you more money to actually do something rather than just talk about what would be nice to do. So I'll leave it there. I know name and contract are there. Go ahead and contact me if you have any questions, and or Pete or Paul are all in the same loop here. We're all just helping out with the big picture discussion. And I'll open it up.
Jen, thanks so much. Yeah, and as Jen mentioned, opportunity to actually put some potential horsepower and funding behind, these smoke ready ideologies, which, up until this point, have kind of been lacking for funds in a lot of places. So would not want that opportunity to go unused. There is one hand up, Jen. Lee Tarnay, you want to, come off mute and fire away?
Hi, my camera's not working right now, but just another question. I didn't see heat pumps on that list for the hardening. So much of, especially mountain communities that get exposed to smoke, they rely on open windows in the summer, right when the smoke, and it's really hard to cool your house down if you don't have air conditioning. Heat pumps right now are subsidized heavily with the new tax breaks, and I think there's a potential opportunity as people look at ways to cool their house down in the summer to not exchange air, but just exchange heat using, and you have to, there's details on how that works, but basically with a heat pump, you don't need to exchange air. All you do is exchange heat with between the inside and the outside. You punch a hole in a wall, and you don't have to do ducting. It's a fairly simple retrofit, and I use them. I just put some in my house because we're girding ourselves for El Nino, and just something to keep on the radar there, I think. And with the new funding coming out, maybe you could enhance the subsidies that are already out there for heat pumps in these communities and make sure people there at least are hardening their houses.
Gotcha. Yeah. So on the CWDG website, and when you go there, you'll notice it does have eligibility, like what kinds of things we can or can't really fund or get through. So I would definitely, I think you should probably check in on that, because things like that typically are not falling in the category of eligibilities. It's more geared toward, not like home hardening is not necessarily in the eligibility category. However, like, smoke ready kits is. And so it's a means, I think, to kind of get it back through community planning and community preparation, more so than it is to like home upgrades at this point. But those are things like, if that's a mitigation measure that needs to be included in the CWPP, is, recognition or identification thereof. I mean, that's something you could probably at least put in there. It doesn't hurt anything. And I see Pete's hands up. So Pete, you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I just wanted to pass on that there's going to be another round of CWDG grants, and I am working with leadership to include, there goes Tim Melcher, to have some language that's even beyond the current language of acceptable projects. And so the hope is that keys into it. And then the bottom line is that of 36, I guess, different CWPPs in the first round, 36 of the projects are CWPPs, and the opportunity to integrate while they are revising or developing a CWPP with this particular focus of smoke and smoke readiness. I mean, there's nothing that precludes engagement. And so that website is absolutely critical to take a look in your respective state. And I see a whole bunch in North Carolina. I see, the list is, I mean, Tim here probably knows how many states are represented here and probably knows this data inside and out. But, I'm just scrolling it right now. We've got them in Arizona, we've got them in Montana, we've got them all over the place. And so the opportunity to link with this funding that's out there and participate, nothing keeps you from bringing up smoke. Nothing keeps you from throwing out smoke ready principles or identification of vulnerable communities, which was kind of the key point that Jen was making in this process. And, it's a matter of reaching out, and there are contact points there. Tim, go for it.
Yeah, just going to add, in some ways, nothing more than here to both your comments. Certainly, we want to see more engagement, more emphasis of smoke. It is a priority, in many places, even if it wasn't included to the degree that probably most people would have liked to see in some of the initial applications. But yeah, definitely, folks on this call, reach out and support. Applications will be getting put together for round 2. Announcement should come out about when that's going to open up soon. It'll be sometime this summer. Can't give you a specific date yet, but yeah, want to see the increased engagement on that. And we are, as this is a new program, looking at how we can improve. So we'll have those ongoing dialogues about, okay, how can we emphasize and make sure that smoke is included, all the related issues that should be in the CWPPs, because that's going to set the stage for implementation, whether it's through CWDG funding or other opportunities that derive from the CWPPs. So, thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks,
And
Tim.
so like Pete said, the initial funding that was set aside for this is 525 million. In this last round, we had applications from 36 states, 45 tribal nations. There was like 400 and some applications itself. They issued 197 million for 100 different proposals that are out there. So just, put it all in perspective in terms of small communities and what amazing differences just even like $1 million could make to preparing your community for a wildfire event. Because in all likelihood, the community will hear and see and smell and deal with the impacts of smoke long before, if they ever get dealing with the flames itself. And Tim, I see your hands back up. Is that legacy, or did you have a go back?
Oh, well, no, it's 525 million. That's the amount of applications. That was the dollar value in the first round that was submitted. So it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of, more like the first round in terms of the amount available each round. Don't have precise numbers, but 150,
Gotcha.
200 million, somewhere in that range available for funding.
Okay.
So just want to clarify. Thanks.
And Pam, just a reminder too, right? They have to be eligible for 2 out of the 3 priorities, right? They have to have at least 2 of the 3 priorities for eligibility.
No, actually, and you can get into the details. Don't want to take over the call here, but minimum eligibility is basically needs to be an at-risk community, and you shared that link. The fire deputy communities did a real good job of that little primer to kind of walk through that. There are 3 legislative priorities that position applicants to receive some additional points in the review process. So that's
Gotcha.
Low income, if the community is at a very high wildfire hazard, and if they've been impacted by a severe disaster that impacts their wildfire risk or hazard. So not eligibility requirements, but provide opportunities for basically bonus points during the review process of their application. But basically, just at-risk communities is the minimum eligibility.
All right. Well, there's my 2 cents on the subject. If you have questions or follow up, like I said, reach out to myself and Pete, or we'll get it in the right hands. We'll get the right answers for everyone that needs it, and go from there.
Jen, Tim, thanks so much. And as kind of was laid out, in this example is that, there's that connection between CWPPs and then further CWDG grant monies. If you already have a CWPP and you want to update it to include smoke-ready ideologies for then potential further implementation down the road using CWDG funds, getting it in that CWPP is the critical first step, if you will. And so we have Julie Murphy here today, who is now, Julie, I believe, currently with the Forest Service, but previously with the state of Utah Department of Forestry, if I'm right. And Julia was involved in the effort to update CWPPs statewide, if I'm not misspeaking, and included some smoke-ready ideology and components in those CWPPs. So she's going to walk you through kind of how that was implemented at the state level for the state of Utah. Julie, thanks for joining us.
Great. Great. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. So I'm going to take this down to a smaller perspective just because I did work for the state of Utah, so it's not a national perspective with other states. And in Utah, we do things a little bit differently, and just give you a little bit background about myself, and thanks for giving me that background. But I was the wildfire risk reduction coordinator for the state of Utah, so I was a point of contact for all CWDG grants, for all CWPPs and the clearinghouse for them, and developing them. In Utah, we do things a little differently. We have something called the Community Wildfire Policy, which is legislated with our communities, so that includes counties and all participating entities, so that could be any communities that they have an agreement with us for wildfire suppression, that they do certain things and we do certain things, and we meet up together and we pay for the cost of suppression for them after initial attack. So it's a pretty cool program that's been in place since 2017. But part of that program was that every community that participated would have to have an updated CWPP. And so we created a template specific to Utah for these communities that were part of our agreement. And so that's a little bit different too. So we've been working on that template, and we are redoing that template as we've been in our community wildfire policy, which we call CWS, for 5 years, and it's time to redo. So we have a template for all of our CWPPs that go to all the communities, and that is what we expect them to use with some variation. And then of course we have different types of communities, right, which HOAs and homeowners, which do not have to follow the specific template that we have, but it's been very helpful for us. And so thank you, Jen Croft. You did a wonderful job describing CWPPs and the CWDG. So I'm not going to go into that, but as far as it was concerned in Utah, we talked to Paul Corrigan, who was in Utah as the smoke management coordinator a few months ago, and had the conversation of, is there smoke management issues brought up in CWPPs? And it's in the plan, but nothing specific. And like we've said, that it hasn't really been specifically part of plans up to this point. And as Jen said, part of the problem with the plans is, they were created in 2003, 2004, 2005, and to get funding through the National Fire Plan to do projects, right? So there was a huge push to do plans, but since then, now it's 2023, there's been a lot of lag, and a lot of plans have not been updated. And the key component of a community wildfire preparedness plan is to update it regularly. 5 years minimally is what should be done, and some even more than that, because there's so many changing parts within those. But Utah is currently redoing our template to make it easier for communities to include. We just want it to become more efficient and easier for communities to use. And how do we include smoke impacts? So I'm just going to share this, if I can, my screen, and in our template, we just put it as an appendix for now. So I don't know if it'll work, but because I'm not quite familiar with Teams yet, wasn't the platform that I'm most familiar with. And so this is just, let me go down to this specific one. I know Jen covered most everything, but what I wanted to show you was this appendix that we decided to put in our plan. And this is still in draft format, but this is to help communities understand, what their needs for smoke may be. So, it has a narrative, and it says this plan will be used for the community to address what strategies can be followed to keep the community safe in the event of air quality downgrades to unhealthy levels due to smoke caused by wildfires. So this gives opportunities for communities to involve strategies like understanding the vulnerable demographics within communities, strategies to inform community members of wildfire smoke risks, and strategies on how communities and community members can prepare for low air quality days, such as designing clean room in the house where the air is filtered, help air filtration plans for the whole house, creating a clean space in the community, addressing air filtration in schools, attaching a cache of air filters to loan to vulnerable populations. And so that's just the draft language that we have in there, but it has an opportunity for the communities to create a smoke management plan as part of their CWPP. So we're hoping this is successful. As Jen said, the communities are really the ones that do the CWPPs, and it's within their wheelhouse. So there's not much agencies can force upon them. But as we bring this in as an educational tool, and as we increase prescribed fire and we increase all of these things, like other considerations as prescribed fire, within CWPPs and with those actionable items, is are they able to include some of those things that are available with CWDG? So it goes really well hand in hand. And in this appendix, we have a list of smoke resources available. So that's what we have done in Utah to kind of start including it in the conversation. Of course, it's just the beginning, but it's really getting this together with what everything else is going on, and the importance of smoke management and impacts. So that's all I have. If any questions?
Thanks a bunch, Julie.
Julie, thanks so
I
much.
think, yeah, I think it kind of highlights there's always so much focus on, cutting brush and designated evacuation routes, but really it's so much impact on citizens in this country is the air quality effects of wildland fires. So I think wherever we can push folks to think about that, not just the acute risk, but the cumulative, continuous risks that comes along with smoke.
For sure. And one thing that Julie said that I think will be important for this group is, like she said, these are kind of documents that come out of the Office of, say, Emergency Response or equivalent there at the county level. And oftentimes, from what I've seen, being crafted by contractors that are hired to put these plans together. But, those groups will reach out to either local land managers or sometimes the local departments of health for guidance on additions to CWPPs in their area of expertise. I know it's common that folks at the forest level, out of the fire shops, will attend or be asked to comment on these plans, as well as, like I said, local departments of health to give them some guidance on whether it's either potential water quality or air quality issues. So, with the folks on this call, I do see, an important avenue of sharing information, providing guidance, and getting some of these potential smoke-ready ideologies in CWPPs, because you may be asked to comment or have an opportunity to share with folks that are creating these documents that otherwise were unaware that this kind of potential is out there.
Yep, exactly. Start with the education and coordination, get what we need for the community. So thank you. Thanks,
Julie. Saw Tim threw in the chat the CWDG program website. I know that Pete at the Washington office level will continue to kind of work on some agency level guidance to be included on, if not, the website that Tim included, other or like websites to provide some guidance in the future as we move towards this second round application process to help folks steer what specific kind of to their locations, some general smoke ready appendix like you saw for Julie's example to be included in CWPP. So we'll keep you guys posted on when that is flown and hope that you pass it around.
Yeah, there's a ton of great stuff in the chat, and not knowing how everybody's access to Teams is if you're coming from a different agency. We'll grab Jen and Julie's slides as well as all the links shared in the chat and probably just email it to the same list of folks that we sent the meeting invite to, so that everybody can track back with those in case you're not able to open them now.
Hey,
Sounds
Paul,
good.
we could certainly post that on the NWCG Smoke Committee web resource page, which is on the University of Idaho Frames site. And so we'll, we can use that as a repository. Probably should have been doing that all along, but we'll make that happen. Right, Seth and Paul?
Sounds good. Thanks everybody for joining today. Unless there's any last questions or anything you want to touch on. See a hand shot up. Amber.
Excuse me. Hi, everybody. Amber Ortega here. I just want to put out a tiny request from the research community. Some of you may know I used to be involved in wildland fire smoke research with NASA and NOAA and CU Boulder, University of Arizona in my previous life, so to speak. And most of you know that Ravon from NOAA is the steward and creator of Her Smoke. And so he emailed out our little sort of group chat, so to speak, of atmospheric scientists in the West that study fire or have studied smoke, asking if anybody has data from the last couple weeks with the Canadian wildfire smoke. Additionally, the Her Smoke model predicts that'll linger for at least the next week or two. You know, they're familiar with Air Now. I brought to their attention the fire and smoke map, but they're also curious if any states or any other entities have smoke data that might not be easily publicly available. Really, I think they're trying to fine tune that Her Smoke model. So if you have anything or that interests you, I volunteered to sort of be a liaison between the research community, regulatory community, and the fire practitioner community, just because I have a kind of a foot in all of those areas. So if any of this is perking your ears up, feel free to email or message me offline and I can connect you. And this is all in the name of fine tuning and bettering our smoke models, so that when stuff like this happens, when you run them, you can get the most accurate results that we can get at this time. Thanks.
Thanks, Amber. Yeah, maybe throw your contact info in the chat and folks could go direct with you with any response. So we'll look to have another meeting maybe in a couple months. We'll see how fire season changes that or influences that. Josh, hand up.
Thanks, Seth. And I just want to let this community know that we have a outreach open right now for the National Smoke Cash Manager 120-day detail that's open through next the 31st. This is just a detail, but if people are interested in it, please don't hesitate to hit me up with your contact information. We are looking to fly it permanently once we get permission sometime, but just looking at for interest. And I think this is a great community to kind of outreach it, and I can dump that information in a chat if you guys are okay with it.
Sure thing, Josh.
All right, thanks. Sorry for the shameless plug, but we're looking for a good person.
Yeah, no. Hope you get them, and yeah, happy to help.
Super important position for us.
Thanks. So again, yeah, we'll look to reconvene again in a couple months. Paul and I generally kind of get these agendas together based on topics that we feel like would be relevant to the group. And again, the focus is to increase that communication, message sharing, and collaboration between kind of these two groups of categorizing, I guess, as the regulatory community and land manager community. So if you have any input in terms of aspects that you would like to see in future calls, please reach out to Paul and I, and we'll look to reconvene again in a couple months. Paul, anything else?
No, thanks everyone. Yeah, and
Yep.
very much to our presenters, Jim and Jen and Julie and Rick Gillum.
Yes, thank you all. Appreciate the time, and we'll talk again before long. Have a good one.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Paul.
Good work, Paul.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Seth.
See you.